afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this really somber celebration, really. I'm going to call it a somber celebration because there are many celebrations that we have. Every day, every month, there's some kind of celebration honoring one activity or one organization or another. But none is more important than this one today, is honoring the people who serve and recognizing Sexual Assault Month. Now, over the course of my career, in my past career, I've had the opportunity to work closely with the sexual assault program, particularly Jeannie and her staff. And they do a tireless work in protecting the rights of women, protecting their health and their ability to live a safe and healthy life. I've had the opportunity to do some interviews with Jeannie, and I want to say, Jeannie, thank you for doing this program, and thank you to everybody across the United States, across this country, the state of Minnesota and St. Louis County for doing that, and all the support you get from our court system. I see Judge Flory is here, and the Honorable Judge Frank is here, and we have some county attorneys in the back, Michelle Anderson. We've got Carl Sundquist, and I see that Mr. Williams is back here, and many of you others who arrange mental health personnel, who all are here, Sharon Chadwick, who are all here to support what you do, Jeannie, as part of this sexual assault program. So as the mayor of Virginia, it's my honor and privilege to be here, and thank you for asking me to do so. And I'm here to read a proclamation on behalf of the city and its residents and our city council. And I'd like to do that today before we introduce our very honored and prominent guest speaker. Whereas nationally, Sexual Assault Awareness Month is in April, is it intended to bring awareness to the fact that sexual violence is widespread and is a public concern for individuals, for families, for communities, and for community members. Whereas child sexual abuse and exploitation, rape, and sexual harassment impact all communities, as seen by the national statistics. 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 6 boys will be sexually violated by the age of 18. 1 in 5 children is solicited sexually while on the internet. 70% of all sexual assaults happen to children 17 years and younger. Whereas the Minnesota Department of Health has determined that sexual violence costs Minnesotans 3.3 times more than alcohol-impaired driving. Whereas since 1984, the sexual assault program has been the only program to provide free, direct victim services with sexual violence survivors and community awareness education with northern St. Louis County citizens. Whereas within the past 5 years, our local sexual assault program has worked with 2,402 primary and secondary crime victims of sexual violence who reside in our communities. The program has also provided these survivors with 46,200 ongoing advocacy services. Annually, more than 3,500 community members, student ages, preschool through college, area professionals, and health fair participants are provided awareness and prevention education through this agency. Staff, board members, and volunteers of our local anti-sexual violence program, the Sexual Assault Program of Northeastern Minnesota, encourage everyone to speak out when witnessing acts of violence, however small, and to help survivors connect with community allies. And together, we must work to educate and engage our communities in sexual violence awareness and prevention, and to believe, and to listen, and to learn, and to support its victims and family members. The Teal Ribbon Campaign, as we see today, honors local survivors and their loved ones. And you see these posted all over the city of Virginia, and I'm sure they're everywhere. Whereas all Minnesotans must participate and be part of the solution to eliminate crimes of violence, particularly crimes of sexual violence. Therefore, I, the Mayor of the City of Virginia, join other leaders and do by here proclaim the month of April in the year of 2016 as Sexual Assault Awareness Month. In testimony, I have here underset my hand and caused to be affixed the Great Seal of the City of Virginia, located in St. Louis County in the state of Minnesota. Congratulations to Jeannie and your staff, and please remember all the victims of sexual assault as they occur not only in northern St. Louis County, but all over the United States. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Coffey. My name is Michelle Anderson. I'm currently serve as the board secretary. On behalf of everyone, the board, Jeannie, the director, her staff who's worked hard to have this organized for us all today, as well as Afton and Laura, I see you, Hannah, the volunteers. Thank you all for being here. We are here to honor victims or survivors and to celebrate April, which is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. It's humbling to look out here and see a lot of you who are pioneers or who have been pioneers in the movement locally. It's the professionals here, advocates, as well as community members and survivors that I've seen here. It is a true testament to grassroots advocacy. You all are leaders to fight to prevent, to end sexual violence. This month gives us that chance to recommit ourselves to further build a culture that involves mutual consent and mutual respect, as well as challenges our society's misperception of rape. I want to thank you all for your past and present work. I would be remiss if I didn't single out the work of Jeannie Olson, who has dedicated her life, her professional life, to compassionately and courageously serving victims in our community. She, along with Afton and Laura, currently staff members, do this work on behalf of victims, and their work reaches far and wide. The work they are doing to educate the public, mentor professionals, and empower victims reaches far and wide. In the past 5 years, you'll see some of the statistics. This agency has served 2,402 victims of sexual violence. And as a result, victims receive 42,600 documented services. That's, thank you doesn't seem quite enough. It's my privilege to turn the program over to the Honorable James Flory, who will introduce our distinguished speaker, the Honorable Judge Frank. Having been both a prosecutor and judge in Virginia, Judge Flory brings with him years of experience in dealing with cases involving sexual violence. Judge Flory is mindful of the intricacies of these cases that come before him. He manages his courtroom in a way such that is respectful to victims and is willing to challenge those instances where there's victim blaming. He encourages the parties to keep the cases at a pace that would keep them moving through the process to avoid future victimization or continued victimization for those victims that's caused by the delay in the court process. Judge Flory is decisive, and he's conscientious and considers his impact and when he's considering decisions of what's best for the offenders, for victims, and ultimately for our communities. So it is with great honor, and thank you, Judge Flory. His work certainly makes a difference in our community and for survivors. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And I want to start by congratulating the Sexual Assault Program. You've been around in this community doing your good work almost as long as I've been around here. I've worked through the years with the program here. I was an early board member, but that was a very long time ago. But you do such great work for the community. We appreciate it in the court system. I always appreciate it when I see normally Jeannie in the courtroom with someone, and it brings to my attention that she's there with someone who's been harmed in our community. And it's important that we know that, because we often don't know who's sitting out there and what our words are doing to them. So thank you for the work you've done in the program here. It is my honor and privilege to introduce your keynote speaker today, Judge Frank. He and I also go way back together. We worked together as prosecutors in the St. Louis County Attorney's Office, and he was a mentor for me when I first started there, not long out of law school, and we worked together for, I think, about a little over 2 years before he went on the bench. And once he was on the bench, I tried many cases in front of him, and he was a mentor for me in that respect too, and how to represent the citizens of our communities in prosecuting cases, and particularly sexual assault cases. I think it's ironic that we're here. When Judge Frank and I started in this community as lawyers, we actually held court in this courtroom. We would walk from the courthouse over here with big armloads of files and hold county court matters over here, at least for a little while. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say that the bell tower on this building has always brought me solace, because Judge Frank always was a passionate person about making sure that everyone in his courtroom understood everything that was going on, and that they felt that they were heard. It's a great quality. At times, though, when we had a calendar of perhaps 40 people in the morning, and he would do that for all 40 of them, those of us that were there for all 40 cases would need to check out, mentally anyway. And my checkout was to stare out the courtroom window at the bell tower of the Virginia City Hall and take myself to someplace else for a little while. But what was so important about that was that, his concern for those that were appearing and understanding and what was going on, and his understanding and wanting to make sure that they knew what was happening and could understand afterwards. He's been a real leader in our community in the area of sexual assault prosecutions. Took the first case to the Minnesota Supreme Court, State v. Myers, that allowed expert testimony on the issue of child sexual abuse syndrome. That was for children, young children. A few years later, we extended that concept of expert testimony to allow the same type of evidence for adolescents, and was a great thing for prosecuting, to give jurors an understanding of why kids might not report right away, why kids or adolescents might continue to have contact with their abuser. Juries couldn't understand that, and by being able to provide them with some insight was a great advancement, not only for our community, but these are Minnesota Supreme Court decisions that remain today. So it's lasted. Judge Frank has been an advocate, always a passionate advocate for giving voice to those in the court system who don't otherwise have a voice. And we've all learned from that, and so that's why it is my great honor and privilege to present your keynote speaker here today, the Honorable Donovan W. Frank, Judge of Federal District Court of the District of Minnesota. And it's also my honor and privilege to present to you an Outstanding Service Award on behalf of the Sexual Assault Program here. It's presented to the Honorable Judge Frank for his lifelong service and dedication with individuals, families, and communities, in addition to his advocacy for equal rights and justice. It's signed by Jeannie Olson here and dated today's date.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Judge Flory and Jean Olson and the whole group. Well, first, I would like to thank the Sexual Assault Program in Northern St. Louis County for the invitation to speak at this very special event today and this evening. And as it's been touched upon, this is indeed Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So importantly, it calls attention to the fact that even with all the progress that we have made as a society and a community, there's much to be done. The Sexual Assault Program of Northern St. Louis County and so many other advocacy groups across the country continue to work and are working with community organizations and the civil and criminal justice system to make us a more caring and more sensitive system. However, we must acknowledge that sexual violence remains a significant issue and continues to be in many ways widespread across our state and country. And it truly impacts, as has been touched on by already the people that have taken this podium, every individual in our community, in our state, and our country, and I'll do my best to explain why during the next few minutes. I am quite certain, though, I'm speaking to the choir, so to speak, here, because many in this room know better than I that as individuals and as community organizations, whether they be public or private, we have an obligation to work together, we truly do, to educate our citizens and our community about the prevention of sexual violence and support victims in doing so. We cannot remain silent regarding the negative and inaccurate stereotypes that continue to exist. We must speak out against judgmental and harmful attitudes and behavior. And why I begun my remarks with this statement, or maybe I should say this proclamation, is this. Not just as a judge, but as a fellow human being, citizen, and community member, I am reminded of one of my favorite quotes by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and I quote, "In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends," end of quote. I share this quote with you today because on such an important issue as it brings us together today, as citizens, as a community, as a state and country, we cannot remain silent on the issue of sexual violence. Now, whether it's discussing the issue of sexual assault in an educational setting, which I'll talk about in a moment, like a school, which I will mention in a few moments, or perhaps a college campus, where it's estimated that 1 in 4 or 1 to 4 to 5 college women in our country have been or will be victims of sexual assault or attempted sexual assault during their college career. And in fact, there are many nationwide surveys that suggest and essentially confirm that 7.3% of high school students have reported being in some way coerced to have some type of sexual contact. And that's more females than males. Those numbers break down to 10.5% of all high school females and 4.2% of all males. I would suggest to each of you this evening that any numbers that you hear underestimate the problem because, as many individuals, again in this room, know better than I, many cases go unreported. Now, even though those numbers are slowly improving, I still must say that I believe that victims are afraid to sometimes tell law enforcement, their friends, or their family about what's happened. Victims may worry that their experience of abuse will not be believed and no one is there to help them. They perhaps blame themselves and are shamed or embarrassed, or in most severe cases, they've been threatened if they tell anyone. Again, that is why advocacy programs like the Sexual Assault Program in Northern St. Louis County are so vital to our communities. Now, if I may, on a very positive note, because I am here with much optimism, in these complicated times that we live in, I would say this. We each need to be reminded, as do I, that in the end, the true measure of a civilized and democratic society is the way in which we treat those individuals most in need. Who does that include? That includes especially our children, individuals with disabilities, our senior citizens, other people most vulnerable amongst us, and yes, victims of crimes, including and especially victims of sexual assault and child sexual abuse. Now, as many of you in this room know, in my profession as a judge, that is ultimately the true definition of providing equal justice and equal access to justice to everyone. That is, you serve all citizens, regardless of who they might be, rich or poor, young or old, and especially those most vulnerable living within each of our communities. Now, because of much of the work I am doing with the disability community, I want to remind each of us that 68 to 83% of women with disabilities will be sexually assaulted or abused at least once in their lifetime, and that is not a new statistic. In fact, I would suggest to you, and I would suggest that most mental health professionals and therapists and advocacy groups would say, Judge, you should have started at 83% because it's not lower than that. And in my experience, I would confirm that as well. That means, of course, that the likelihood of sexual victimization is even higher for children with intellectual and mental health disabilities. And I would suggest to you today that when sexual assault or abuse involves children or individuals with disabilities, there's even a higher percentage that go unreported that we don't know about. I'm reminded of a special moment in time that happened here in Virginia when I was a state court judge in the same building that the Honorable Gary Pagasetti and Honorable Jim Flory preside in now, when a St. Louis County social worker and a sexual assault advocate said, we've been reading about you having civics days in the courthouse. We would like to bring a group of women and men primarily with intellectual and developmental disabilities for their civics afternoon in your courtroom. And that was right over here, not too far away. It was a civics day, and so here's what happened. On this day, a group of about 25 adults, mostly with disabilities, many with developmental disabilities, came to the courthouse here in Virginia, and here's what happened. I asked them the same question that I asked college kids, elementary school kids, middle school kids, high school kids. What are the most important rights to you? Their responses not only touched my heart, but reminded me of the oath that every judge takes and what it means, because only individuals who struggle with some of these daily issues really could say what was about to be said to me. Without hesitation, a woman with a developmental disability raised her hand and said to me, and I quote, I have the right, Judge, to be respected and believed as a victim of sexual assault and physical abuse. I want to be believed. End of quote. Because I had talked that day with this same group about equal justice under the Constitution, and there may be a touch of emotion here as I say this, as these group of individuals that live here in Virginia left the courtroom, that same woman stopped me and said this to me, Judge Frank, and I have the quote, this phrase that you've used at least once or twice today, equal justice under law, does that mean I get the same rights and protection as the president's wife who lives in the White House? I said, Madam, that's exactly what it means. There are many reasons to be optimistic and hopeful, as I've said. Many communities in our state and country, including here in the Iron Range, are taking and have taken action to decrease sexual violence and to increase, importantly, educational awareness and community involvement. And in doing so, we are a safer community, and they're making us a safer community all around us. Now, there are many examples in this community, including what the sexual assault program in northern St. Louis County is doing, which has served this community for 32 years, as many of you know. And I'd like to quote Gene Olson, who has said more than once, and I quote, the more sexual violence is talked about, the more victims will feel comfortable reporting it and seeking help. As many of you know, the services they provide include, amongst other things, I won't list them all, 24-hour crisis intervention, including their sexual assault response team. We should indeed thank and commend them today for all, not just them, but all the organizations who are not just doing the work, but there's organizations funding these organizations doing the work, which makes our communities a more caring and sensitive community within which to live. So let's give them a hand. Now, in fact, there's so much more coordination going on between entities and government agencies, not just community organizations, but even state and federal organizations, and I'll just name one that I'm aware of. For example, some of you may know, I suspect most of you won't know, sex trafficking has become such a major problem nationwide, and the sexual abuse and assault that goes with it, that to the credit of the St. Louis County Attorney's Office and the U.S. Attorney's Office here in the District of Minnesota, so that includes, of course, Mark Rubin making a decision and the U.S. Attorney's Andy Luger, they have been working together on sex trafficking crimes, and an assistant St. Louis County attorney and an assistant U.S. attorney tried all the sex trafficking cases in front of me that were affecting northern Minnesota, Duluth, and because they'd come in from other states, they tried it together in my federal courtroom in downtown St. Paul. And I would suggest to you that that benefited the entire community and state, and these partnerships and collaborations truly serve the public interest and the interests of justice. Now, before I ask you to step back with me a few years, I want to make an observation. I think that's true today especially, but sometimes we forget. Too often individuals and communities underestimate the power of a touch, a smile, a kind word, a listening ear, an honest compliment, or the smallest act of caring, all of which truly have the ability to turn someone's life around, especially a victim of sexual assault. Please come back with me, if you would, for a few minutes to the late 1970s and early 1980s. Imagine, and Judge Flory touched on it, imagine, if you will, please, not hardly a block away from here in the St. Louis County Courthouse in Virginia, Minnesota, a state district court judge, that's right, here in Virginia, Judge Mitchell A. Dubow was the very first judge in this state, that's right, the very first, to admit expert testimony in a child sexual abuse prosecution so that we could assist the jury in evaluating why such crimes go unreported and to assist them in understanding the behavior of a 7-year-old child who had been sexually abused. Judge Dubow was the very first judge in Minnesota to ever allow it, and one of the first in the United States of America. The Supreme Court case, which was the first of its kind, and Judge Flory touched on that, and one of the very first in the United States was State versus Meyer. The trial was over here in 1982, the Supreme Court decision in 84. That was Judge Dubow who had the courage to do that. It remains the law of the state today and is frequently cited in child sexual abuse cases. However, it didn't end there. In State versus Hall, the same Judge, Mitchell Dubow, the same expert, Dr. Claire Bell, and your own Judge Flory, then Assistant St. Louis County Attorney Jim Flory, did the same thing with a teenage victim of sexual assault in State versus Hall, another case that went to the Minnesota Supreme Court. The first two in this state. And if you don't think that those two cases have made this community and this state a safer place for children, families, and citizens, all citizens of Minnesota, in 2011, the Supreme Court, citing Myers and Hall, ruled in a case originating out of Ramsey County, State versus Obeta, O-B-E-T-A, that expert testimony now for the first time will be allowed in a more limited fashion for adult women and men of rape. Just think, right here, and I get a little emotional when I talk about this because many of us in this room, including Judge Flory, Judge Pagliacetti, and others, we learned so much from Judge Dubow. Another example that happened right here in Virginia. And I might suggest if other judges would have been doing this, there wouldn't have been any need for victim notification laws and requirement for victim impact statements long before these statutes were enacted in this state and by the federal government, requiring notice to victims of plea agreements and sentencing procedures. And Judge Flory can account and knows this. You'd go in front of Judge Dubow, and here's what he would say. Counsel, have you discussed the plea agreement with the victim as well as law enforcement? And if your answer was anything but yes, Your Honor, we sat down and did that, he then would say, counsel, when you carried out your responsibilities, you come on back. This hearing is adjourned. Right here in Virginia, Minnesota. Now, Someone suggests that sexual advocacy programs, domestic abuse advocacy programs, and other community organizations here in this community on the Iron Range are responsible for making more people, whether it was Judge Dubois, myself, Judge Flory as prosecutors, the court system in general, are responsible for making us a more sensitive, understanding, and responsive system. I'll let the public decide that. I'll let you all decide that as you look today and you look back. I do want to say something before I leave that time frame and before I conclude my remarks, and I will get probably a little emotional about it. When Judge Dubois' retirement party was held here in Virginia, and by the way, he died in 2006, he was asked what's the most important thing that he did during his career as a judge, which he was a judge here from 1966 to 1989, and here's what he said, and I quote, "By handling child sexual abuse and sexual assault cases the way I did, I believe my decisions in State versus Myers and State versus Hall made our community and our state a safer place for children, families, and all our citizens." End of quote. I think he was right. Now, as I was driving up here to today's event, I've been reminiscing a little bit. I'm reminded of a meeting I attended in the 1980s when I was a state judge here in Virginia. A state legislative criminal justice committee wanted to get together with all players in the juvenile and adult system. So there was judges, prosecutors, defense lawyers, social workers, and they posed the following questions, the legislators did. Quote, "With the increase in juvenile delinquency and adult crimes, and our jails and prisons are filling up," and this was back quite a while, "what can we do to drive down crime and juvenile delinquency, especially violent crime, including child sexual abuse and sexual assault?" What we told the legislative committee back at that time is so appropriate to mention today as we commemorate April as the Sexual Assault Awareness Month and participate in the many activities planned by the Sexual Assault Program in northern St. Louis County. We said as a group, and we could agree on just one thing to tell them as a group, instead of putting all of the money into the back end of the justice system, we need to support and fund our schools, including supporting our community organizations and activities for our children during the school year, and advocacy groups and other community partnerships with the schools. We said that if we can do that and create some of these community partnerships, we will drive down crime and improve our state and communities over time. Today, frankly, we are reminded that we need to continue to support and fund our schools, fund our community organizations and advocacy groups so that we can truly place a top priority on these issues. And I would suggest beginning with preschool educational activities that are going on as we speak on the Iron Range and continue right on through high school and college. And in fact, I would suggest in many schools this involves engaging middle and high school students in skill building activities that address healthy sexuality and dating relationships. When we do this and we engage in these important community partnerships with not just the sexual assault program in northern St. Louis County, but as they work with other entities, including the Range Mental Health Center and all the other organizations here, I would suggest that then and now education of our general public, especially in our schools, needs to be a top priority and is in fact a large component of the sexual assault program in northern St. Louis County. And that's true whether that's going on in preschool situations, high schools, colleges. They're educating nursing students, law enforcement, and the list goes on, while at the same time encouraging these community partnerships. As it turns out, as many of you in this room know, when we do these things, it not only makes us to have a safer community, but then and now it's cost effective so our community can stay safe, serve the public interest, and still save the taxpayers some money along the way, so everybody wins. As I conclude, I want to leave you with just a couple of thoughts. As a federal judge, I have the privilege of conducting naturalization ceremonies for new citizens, And I want to read you just one quote that I tell new citizens in terms of their living in this country, because I think it fits the theme, one of the themes today. And here's the quote that I give them as part of my remarks, and I quote, "The freedom of democracy also carries a responsibility to your community and to those around you. Democratic societies only work when the people who live there get along, when they are tolerant of one another. I would urge you to care for and be kind to your neighbors and people around you and extend a caring hand to those most in need. Our country will only continue to thrive as a great nation if we care about our fellow citizens and those in need. As new citizens, you can set an example of compassion and tolerance for everyone to follow." Now, when we each, meaning all of us here, and again, I know I'm talking to the choir in many ways, but when we each set an example of compassion and tolerance for everyone to follow, we will become and do become more sensitive and understanding to victims of child sexual abuse, coerced sexual contact, and sexual assault, and we become less judgmental. This is the key responsibility of every community and the citizens which live in each community. I believe, as I end my remarks, that the most important goal in life is to live a life consistent with the values that we each hold dear, and then you act on what you believe in. And then if we strive to reach this goal and we teach that to our children and set an example for our children, I believe that what happens in a community like this are two things. Basically, two things happen. We set an example of compassion and service for others to follow. We become a more sensitive and understanding community, which is of such vital importance, and in so doing, we extend a helping hand to those most in need, especially for victims of sexual assault, and that's true whether they be children, teenagers, or adults. Thank you so much for the privilege of addressing you today. It's a great day. Thank you. Am I supposed to do that secret thing now, Jane?
Yes.
Okay. And they're saying, what is he doing? The secret thing. Well, I didn't know I was going to get the award, but the only thing I know for certain is the person I'm about to give this award to on behalf of the advocacy program in this community is much more deserving than I. And this award, and before I say what it is, I would like Dr. Claire Bell to come up here to the podium. You can't peek at it.
You're going to tell me a secret?
Yeah, I'll tell you a secret. Well, I want to say something first about my friend Dr. Bell. She hates it when I say doctor, so Claire.
Judge Bell.
Okay, Judge Bell, that's okay.
Dr. Frank.
The
Judge
truth,
Bell.
the truth of the matter is, and I suspect that Jim Flory, also known as Judge Flory, former prosecutor Flory, would agree with me. I came up here out of law school as a prosecutor in 1977, completely ignorant. I think I had some passion and loved, I wanted to be a lawyer. I thought I'd love my job, and I did. Well, people like Claire Bell, and there's others in the room, other assault programs, other interested community members, they knew, oh no, here comes another new ignorant prosecutor, and they hoped that, well, maybe he has an open mind. So the truth is, I was being trained the entire time and didn't know it on our child sexual abuse team. And of course, you realize that over time, but I believe it made me and probably a lot of other people in this room, and people aren't here, better human beings and better, and makes me a better judge. And of course, as you've heard from both Judge Floyd and myself, she was the expert witness in those first two big cases. Between her expertise and the courage of Judge Mitchell A. Dubois, incredible really, when you think about it. So, this is an Outstanding Service Award presented to Dr. Claire Bell for her lifelong service and dedication with individuals and families thus creating healthy and safer communities. And indeed, Claire, you have done that. Congratulations.
Do I have to say something?
If you'd like. And don't be mad at me, they swore me to secrecy. I wasn't.
Oh, boy. Talk about unexpected, holy cow. Thank you so much. Means the world to me. You were up here before I came up here.
That's right.
Yeah.
But you still train me.
You didn't know anything before I came, did you? And I could go on and on and on forever, which I will not do. But I know that during the time when what Donovan is talking about, when those 2 cases came before the courts and that, was really a wonderful time up here in terms of working with sexual abuse. We had a wonderful cooperative relationship, with mental health, with social services, with probation, with the courts, with the judges, and it worked beautifully is the only word I can say. I don't know if it still does anymore, but it was a period of time when the way it worked gave a lot of hope in terms of what can be done when people work together. And this young man here, had the integrity and had the foresight. In this particular case, one of the defense attorneys opened the door for this testimony to be allowed, and nobody else but Donovan here would have walked right into that door, and that's how that case ended up before the Supreme Court and became the law of the land. And then Jim followed, a couple of years later with the adolescent court. So it really is, it's Judge DeBow and it's our courageous county attorneys up here that deserve all the credit. I was kind of new to all of this, and sometimes I think back and I thought, wow, I was really gutsy to say what I said. Had it been a couple of years later, I might have been more careful. Anyway, thank you.
I really think that Gene Olsen should come up to kind of wind this up. I think so. Gene, we want Gene. We want Gene. We want Gene.
Stinker.
Well, thank you, everybody. Were you going to be available for questions at all? Didn't we talk about? Or does anyone have any questions for? No?
How old am I? No, I'm not going to say.
No? Me neither. Me neither. I think that's it. I thank all of you for coming, and it is preaching to the choir. So, but thank you very much. It's been a great month.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks. Thank you.